Welcome to the Top Order podcast. Me, Bordy and Lippy here for our World Cup 2023 review. We've got a beaming Australian, a slightly less happy Kiwi, and a very, very dejected Englishman, and a billion dejected Indians around the world as well. We're going to come on to all of that and more, our teams of the tournament, what needs changing for the next World Cup in terms of format if we were in charge of the ICC, and a lot more. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. So, boys, we're here. It's about a week or so after the final of World Cup 2023. We obviously are going to go through a lot in terms of unpacking the tournament. Throughout the course of the tournament, we had daily shows reviewing all of the games and all of the action across the venues all across India. Covered the final, and I think obviously we're going to talk in a little bit of detail about that. We also want to talk a little bit about the format of this World Cup and the future, or the next World Cup as well, which is back to 14 teams. And also the format of one-day cricket. I think there's a lot of arguments, a lot of conjecture going around the Twitter sphere, particularly. Exosphere doesn't work as well, does it, as Twitter?
No, that's
sphere?
a very different thing. That's an actual thing, an actual physical thing.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the Twitter sphere, definitely... look, I guess some chat around the jeopardy elements of this tournament and the fact that there weren't a lot of close games throughout the course of the tournament as well. So we'll come on to that. We've got some highlights and lowlights, and we'll also try and pick a team of the tournament where one player from each nation has to feature as well. And I know that's been...
And an X Factor.
And an X Factor player as well. So that's all coming up. But Stu, I think you wanted to open with a question for Bordy, didn't you?
I did, and mainly, obviously, you said that he's grinning away. He probably hasn't stopped grinning all week. I hope not, because that's certainly how I would have felt as a Kiwi. And I think certainly last time that we recorded in person, I think maybe it was the first time. You're not the parochial Aussie that necessarily some people's view as the Australian stereotype. But I think. For the first time, I think I noticed some nerves and maybe some investment actually in the Australian team and in this journey. And I guess there's been a lot of talk since the tournament about maybe this being Australia's greatest ever white ball victory. And I think that's, look, I'm no historian of the game. I have no idea about, how to judge it compared to the other things. So I'm probably not going to go into that there too much. I think from, my own point of view, it does feel like this was the most unlikely, perhaps, in the sense that those 2000s teams, those teams seemed dominant, just completely dominant. It felt like at times that an Australia A team could have won those tournaments. Now we look at this team and I feel, in the same way that I did about their T20 win, a couple of years ago, feels like a very flawed side. But somehow they've managed to win the tournament. They've managed to perform at the right times. They've people kind of say they managed to perform at the right times, but they won 8 straight to get there. They lost 2 games and then won kind of their next maybe 8 or 9 to get...
Or 9 in a row.
9 in a row to win the tournament. So, obviously very well deserving of the title. But I think what I wanted to ask you really, seeing all that investment last time, is this the most enjoyable, the most the most excited you've been to see an Australian side win a World Cup? How do you kind of rank them in terms of your favourites?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. No.
You're lucky that you've had a few. So I'm sitting over here. We haven't had a World Cup win, so it's not as easy for me to think about the best one.
I've been very much practicing my gracious winner face over the last week.
Turn that off.
It is. You're right in almost all of your points. In that it is probably, I think, the most unlikely victory in terms of World Cups, other than maybe the 87 one, I think was probably pretty unlikely. We were an emerging nation again after the sort of debacle of 84-5 and the retirements of a whole bunch of greats at that point in the mid-80s. And there was, a very well-documented resurgence under Alan Border, but it was underway. It wasn't there yet in 87. We didn't really see it until the late 80s, early 90s. This is the most, I think, unlikely World Cup victory that Australia have produced, given the dominance of the team that we beat in the final. In 99, South Africa were a very, very good cricket side, but I think Australia were on par with them. 03 and 07, Australia were clearly the best one-day cricket side in the world at that time. In 07, we were as dominant as we had ever been. And I think there was something about that Australian team in 2015 that you almost felt like they were not quite destined to win it, but once they got to the final, you felt pretty confident that Australia were the favourites for that game, even against an old foe in New Zealand. So for me, in 2023, Australia have overachieved, I think, more than ever we have before in terms of going on to win a major one-day 50-over tournament. We weren't expected to win the 2021 T20 World Cup either, I don't really think. I think that was England's tournament to win, and Australia kind of jagged one there. But in terms of overachieving against a side that was so dominant in the World Cup, it would be like Australia losing the 2007 event, having gone through that and then lost, if they'd lost to Sri Lanka in the final. So that has been the most pleasing thing for me, I think. I don't think it's Australia's greatest moment in cricket. I think winning the semi-final in 99 against South Africa and then going on to win the final, I think those games, because they were so close, and you can't get closer than a tie, those are the greatest achievements I think Australia has ever produced, given the disappointment in 92 and then losing the final in 96, to break through in 99 and then finally win it, I think was Australia's greatest achievement. But it's certainly the most overachieving I think Australia have ever put on the cricket field.
Yeah, I think if you line the sides up as well, there's been a bit of I don't know, it's a meme doing the rounds. It's got the sides from the 87 World Cup final, win 99, 2000, 2007, 2015, and so on and so forth. I think if you look at that 99 side, in my view, that was the greatest Australian white ball side. There was some arguments that 2003 side was better, but I think obviously Shane Warne was a notable omission from that due to his diuretic. So if you go back to that 99 side, you'd got McGrath, you'd got Hayden, you'd got Gilchrist, you'd got Steve Waugh, you'd got Ricky Ponting. It's a little bit of a downgrade to have Brad Hogg, I think, in the side for 03, although
he was pretty good,
He was, but are you gonna sit here and argue that he's better than Shane Warne? No, I don't think we're going to manage that.
He was just as happy as Shane Warne. There's never been an international cricketer happier than Brad Hogg. Yeah, and I think probably because he was an international cricketer.
Yeah. So I think that the achievement and the sum of the parts of this team and the way that the way that people have really fronted up throughout the course of the tournament, and I think almost a little bit unnoticed that Australia had gone 9 on the bounce to win it. All the talk was obviously of, can India make it a complete wash throughout the course of the tournament and win every single game they play in, and then it was really only kind of afterwards that you thought, well, actually Australia have just gone 9 for 9 and 9 out of 10, which is only obviously one different to India's record. And the engraver didn't have to write the shorter word on the trophy, did he, this time round? So I guess that does leave us. We've got to have praise for, I think, both teams in this tournament, but I think we've then also probably got to lead on to the format of the tournament. And the two things I want to cover here are all the teams playing each other, round robin, and then a very, very short finals phase, versus what we're going to have next time, which is back to 14 teams. We're going to have 2 pools, Super Sixes, and so on, and so forth. But first, just a word for the two teams in the final, Stu.
Can I just actually ask before we, because I do think we should give India some praise, and obviously when we talk about our tournament teams and things, we'll there'll be a lot of discussion about the brilliant play from them. But I actually wanted to ask a question. Pat Cummins has obviously been someone who has earned a lot of praise from this final for his performance and obviously his captaincy and the bold decision to bowl first and things. Well, how do you think this changes his legacy, actually? Because he, or does it, in 3 months' time, does it? Because 3 months ago, after the Ashes, I think his captaincy was being, all around the world was being panned.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was being panned as this nice guy who wasn't a very good captain and who...
didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah, didn't know what he was doing and kind of just managed players and didn't really have that tactical sense. Now, he's seen as this, tactical genius for the way he did run the World Cup. Is this a point where he now grows into, a great Australian captain? Or is this just a great moment in, a brilliant cricketer's career?
It's a really interesting question. I think part of the success of Australia over these past 9 games and Pat Cummins' captaincy and the emergence of him as a leader and the coaching staff as well is part of the reason that I've been kind of swept up emotionally in this World Cup, and why I was so excited in the semi-final and final preview, and why I had a bit more emotional investment than I otherwise would. I think I have been caught up in the emotion of Pat Cummins' emergence as a leader. 18 months ago, or whenever it was was the moment where Justin Langer was fired, and effectively the Australian players from the outside looking in were painted in the media as pretty much saying, this is the guy who we don't want anymore. We don't want Justin Langer anymore. He's not the right guy to lead us forward. We want Andrew McDonald. And that was quite clear from the outside. The way it was portrayed in the media is that's what the team did, and that's what Pat Cummins said that he wanted, and that's what he got. And at the time, I think a lot of people said, well, the measure of Pat Cummins as a captain now is he able to deliver results? He's got the team around him that he wanted. He's got the setup and the environment that he wanted. Now you are measured on whether or not you are successful and you've achieved results. And I think 2-2 notwithstanding, Adam, he has delivered outstanding results over the last 18 months or so. He's won a series in India. He's won the World T20, the World Test Championship. He's retained the Ashes, and he's won a 50-over World Cup. And I think at least 2 of those things Australia weren't expected to do. I don't think Australia were expected to win a series in India, and we're certainly not expected to win the 50-over World Cup. I think, having made the Test Championship final, I kind of expected Australia to win that, and I expected Australia to retain the Ashes in England, as a fan. So from a results point of view, he has set a very positive mark in the sand in terms of his legacy around achieving success in the first 18 months of his career. Let's see what the next 24 to 48 months bring in terms of his captaincy. I think he's probably got a shelf life of 4, maybe 5 years as a captain. I think that's probably right for an international captain nowadays. Maybe a bit longer, who knows?
I think maybe a bit less, given that he's a 3-format player and he's a seamer.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be a 3-format captain for that long. Yeah. I think the emergence of Travis Head will start to reignite that debate of split white ball, red ball captains again, and I think that's the way Australia will end up going, purely to reduce his workload, Pat Cummins' workload as a player and as a skipper. But for now, he has written himself a very, very positive legacy, having emerged from a lot of criticism over the last 18 months in terms of the style of play, the negativity. You go back to 2 games into this tournament, being panned for being unprepared, didn't look like they were a good fielding side, didn't look like they had great attitude. He turned that around. He and the coaching staff turned that around, and they've done a remarkable job of that. And you have to pay respect to results. And Australia have got the results.
Yeah. If we're going to go off script within the first question of the podcast, let's go even further off script. What about the Rohit Sharma comparison there? So obviously there's massive age difference. Rohit Sharma, 36 years old. If they'd have won this game, then I think the band very much would have stayed together. Do we see this as potentially wholesale changes? I think if I look at, and it isn't a great barometer, but if you look at the T20 squad that they've just announced for these 5 T20 games. I think there's only 2 guys that were in the squad. I think Ishan Kishan and I think maybe Axar might be in that T20 squad. Look, that could be wrong, so please, if I am wrong, that there might be a 3rd or 4th one, but when I've had first glance at it, it was very, very different personnel. What do we think this means for India? Is this a reset for them, given the 50-over cycle? What do we think is in store for guys like Rohit, for guys like Virat Kohli, potentially for a Ravi Ashwin, maybe even a Jasprit Bumrah as well?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think I've said at some point when we're talking about the World Cup and sort of in the New Zealand frame of mind, and that the World Cups used to be every 4 years, and they used to be kind of your point where you'd start to refresh and you'd go, okay, well now we look ahead to the next World Cup and we'll slowly start phasing out these older players and we'll bring in these newer ones. The T20 World Cup in 2024 is about 6 months away.
Yeah.
So I think I have seen that Rohit and Virat especially, there's going to be discussions between the BCCI and them about probably more with Rahul Dravid around what they want to do. I would say it's in their hands, right? You'd certainly say from this tournament that both of them still have plenty to offer at least in white ball cricket. I mean, their red ball records are pretty handy as well. So it's kind of Virat especially, I think, has always sort of talked about red ball cricket being the pinnacle and things. So I would imagine that, we're not going to see him retire anytime soon. But yeah, I don't know. And whether they're at the next 2027 ODI World Cup, I think there's a lot.
Sharma would be 40, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge there. But in terms of actually contributing, I mean, you think about where that T20 World Cup's going to be in the West Indies and all the pictures we've seen. When you see the CPL, some of the scores sometimes those scores are very low. I would have thought, a player like Virat Kohli who can play that kind of anchor innings. I mean, he can obviously do a bit more than that, but the way he can bat around and bat in all conditions and play spin and, what he did for this Indian side in this ODI World Cup, I think that kind of a player in your T20 lineup is going to be very, very valuable in the West Indies. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, from a legacy point of view, I do feel for these guys because this was going to probably be, they go through this tournament, they're players that have got incredible accolades and that, people are going to look back at their careers very fondly anyway, but this would have been the crowning achievement for some of these guys, particularly Rohit especially.
Wow, and especially I guess with 2 World Test Championship finals, and they've not got over the line in World Cup. So yeah, interesting. Bordy, any thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I think we can move on. I don't think India need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, though. Yeah. They've lost one game of cricket in an otherwise incredibly dominant 12 months.
They've been phenomenal.
They've been incredible. This is the best Indian one-day side that we've ever seen, in terms of the way that they've played. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Format of the tournament. So we'll try and, our intro is 16 minutes. So we'll try and get through some of our 13 questions here. But we've got the lead into the next tournament back to 14 teams, 2 pools of 7 with a Super 6 phase. This is the format that we've talked about. I think when we previewed the 2019 World Cup, or certainly reviewed the 2019 World Cup, I should say, we said that was the best format ever because it mirrored that 92 World Cup. Everybody playing everybody, everybody in the same uniforms back in 92, except the colours were slightly different. What do we think, about the format of this tournament? Did it really have enough interest throughout the course of it, do we think, with one big round robin? And then, I guess, with the full view of hindsight, would we want a longer finals phase?
I think I've come around on this in that, I was very big on that this gives you the best outcome. You get the best teams, everyone plays everyone, all these games end up mattering because, everyone's fighting for these semi-final spots. And to be fair, most of them did right the way through the tournament. I think we didn't see the close games that we wanted to see, but, in terms of the points table, teams were very much into that last round. Teams were still fighting for that final 4th spot at least, the top 2 teams in particular, or top 3 teams actually ended up pulling away with a round or 2 to go. But I do feel like there wasn't enough knockout games. I think that, a lot's been made of, the best team in the tournament should win. But I do think part of tournament play is knockout games and is these fixtures where, perhaps what we're going to get with this Super 6 and all this sort of stuff that we've got, 2 pools of 7 in the next one. And I think even just that, the fact that you can expand to 14 teams, because what Afghanistan brought to this tournament, what the Netherlands brought to this tournament, I think actually was huge. And the way that they were able to, add something interesting about this tournament and, create upsets, if you want to call them upsets. I know a lot of people don't like that word, but they were at the time when they happened. They were upsets. They were, results we didn't expect. And I started to think by the end of this tournament, I wish that knockout phase went a bit longer, because I do think that is a significant part of tournament play that you have to master to be a champion side.
I agree. I think that we would be having a very different conversation, and please don't take this the wrong way, Adam, if England had performed to their expectations in this tournament tournament, and we had an extra side challenging for that top four. As it was, we had Pakistan kind of challenging for the top four, but kind of not really. We had Afghanistan exceeding expectations and getting up towards the top four, but never quite getting there. So we didn't have the jeopardy in the group stage because we had one team that we had high expectations of being in that final four out of the tournament very, very early, and therefore they weren't battling for that same spot, and we didn't have that same number of games that had, high levels of jeopardy, as you said, on teams making the final four or not. I'm with you in that I would like to see, if we maintain this format for the World Cup, an extra game in the post-group play stage where you... as
second bite of the cherry for the team.
Exactly. For the team that finishes top or finishes second, an extra bite at the cherry would be, I think, ideal for them. And I think one of the unintended advantages of the group stage where your points carry over is that good tournament group play gives you some advantage going into the semi-finals and the final.
Yeah, I don't think there's a perfect way of doing it necessarily. I think the thing I like about the Super Six format is the way that you carry your points forward against the teams that you've played, and therefore it matters how you perform against, particularly obviously in the later stage of the tournament. It makes a difference that you've performed against other world-class sides throughout the course of that. It probably takes out, the what happens if you get rained off against one of the minnows, and it gives you that sort of ability that your record then against the other, the other sort of heavier hitting teams is more impactful.
I would say that that probably hurts New Zealand in the way, a side like what New Zealand did in this tournament, where they were very consistent. This isn't a knock on New Zealand, because New Zealand has done this for a long time, but New Zealand is was very consistent in this World Cup and actually in 2019, but against some of those sides that were also semi-finalists, they didn't win those games.
New Zealand didn't win them in 2023 either.
They didn't win them in 2023 and they didn't win them in 2019, but they managed to do what they had to do to get to this fourth spot and then get into those finals and play good knockout cricket.
Adam made an interesting point in that the effect of a washed out game in a Super 6 tournament where you only play 6 pool games as opposed to 9, dropping a point for a no result actually has more impact in terms of the overall tournament. The fewer games, the more impactful dropping a point is. So that is a potential gotcha there for teams that are going to drop a point in the group stage. The other thing that a Super 6 tournament does is it gives an opportunity for a side like Kenya, when we saw them make the Super Sixes. Afghanistan would have made Super Sixes had this been a 16 finals tournament. Ireland, exactly. It sees them into the knockout stage of a big tournament, which I think is huge, right? It's huge for interest. It's huge for the country that's playing. It's huge for those players. I think it's a real advantage of the Super Six system is to have, you know it when you see a minnow team like Australia make the round of 16 in the Football World Cup. The excitement in that nation builds and builds and builds because you're into the knockout. So I think that is a real plus for the Super 6 format.
Awesome. Let's talk about format of one-day international cricket. What has this tournament done for 50 over cricket, do we think?
What do you boys think? Because I'm interested to hear your arguments, but my initial thought is that I don't think one-day cricket is broken. I think that actually there needs to be more emphasis on making the pitches and the conditions actually a fair balance between bat and ball. Because I think when we saw that in this tournament, one-day cricket, for me at least, was fantastic. We saw games that, anything in the 300 to 250 kind of range, those games were great. They were much closer, they were more evenly fought, and they were games where actually you weren't just watching someone stand there and, create an arc, swing the bat and hit sixes whenever they wanted to, which I think, when I think about this tournament, is what happened too much. And that's where bowlers, we're going to talk about teams of the tournament and things, a lot of bowlers found it very difficult to, keep batters under 6 and over. A lot of the chat around how do we fix one-day cricket became about basically how do we help the bowlers. It wasn't around, how do we fix the actual game. It was like, how can we get the bowlers to have more of a chance against these batters with these huge bats, these small boundaries, and these flat wickets that can just smash it all over the park.
Yeah, I agree. There's a really, for viewers and listeners who are interested in the statistics behind this, there's a really good article on ESPN Cricinfo about the optimum score for an ODI, both from a how many games are close point of view and what are the opportunities to win, or what are the percentage chances of winning batting first and batting second. And the outcome of the analysis was that scores between, I think it was 250 and 275 produced the closest games, and 275 to 300 are really, really close behind. 40 to 50% of those games are close by whatever definition ESPN Cricinfo used. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Readers can look it up. But also the team batting first and the team batting second won roughly within a couple of percentage points of each other the same number of games. So there's not necessarily the due factor or the winning the toss and batting first factor in certain countries that there is when you've got a really high score or a really low score. So I think if we were going to fix one-day cricket, I think it's fixing it so that is the optimum score, which we know from statistical analysis produces close games, which we like, and also games that both sides can win.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. It won't surprise you for me to mention, the over rates and the time that the game takes. I think we have to change that.
We've taken a step forward. There's a shot clock now.
There is a shot clock. We have to change the fact that these games are now proportionally longer than they have ever been. And then you look at other sports, and there's been again some comparison done on Major League Baseball, for example. The gap is huger in cricket in terms of how much longer it now takes to play the same length game that was being played 20 years ago. The second thing I think that I would like to see as a change, which I think will even that bat versus ball piece up, is actually to look at the cricket ball. So at the moment we use 2 new white balls, one at each end. That means that we don't get that, and I know that it creates a different problem, but what it means is we don't see the reverse swing that we used to see with Waqar and Wasim and all these guys that were great exponents of that. And I think obviously the technology's come on now in terms of the pink cricket ball, etc. So I think there could be an option to change the ball, which I think would bring the bowlers back into it in those middle overs, because that's where now at times the game just really does go dead, particularly with big bats, good wickets. You've got once you know that you've got 7, 8, 9 wickets in hand, you can actually go through that middle period and still score at 6, 7 and over, taking very few risks, and then it's absolute carnage in the last 10, which I know we want to see those boundaries, but I also want to see a bit more reward for going after a wicket in those middle overs rather than just trying to burgle as many overs as you can.
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I was getting at, because I think that I think we might have seen this change from the fact that everyone said the middle overs were boring, right? Everyone, the idea behind 50 over cricket, it is boring from overs 20
you start watching
to
at 15, and you turn it back on at 40.
Yeah, well, that's what the chat was, right? Yeah. But now what they've done, the changes that have been made, mean now that from overs 15 to 40, they're still just smacking it all over the park. And personally, I don't find that any better. No. So I don't know how to fix that, but I do think that maybe evening the battle between the bat and the ball will help.
There are a number of things that cricket can try, and I think they should investigate and try it in professional cricket before they do it in international cricket. Giving the fielding team the opportunity to choose which ball they take forward after 10 or 15 overs would be one potential way forward. You still get new balls swinging at the start, and then the fielding team gets a choice. Obviously, they don't want to be roughing up one and introducing artificially, a ball that they can scuff up.
I wouldn't be opposed to that, to be honest.
Look, we'll get to that in this week in cricket.
Neither would David Warner.
Anyway, look, there's plenty of opportunity to unpack that. More fielders outside the circle in the opening 10 overs. The opening 10 overs we've seen in this World Cup, vastly different in terms of the way teams play the game and with both bat and ball to the rest of the overs. So smoothing out the transition between 2 and 4 guys out. There are lots and lots of things to try.
Maybe a fielder in the stands that you can play.
Yep, exactly. A guy sort of positioned in bay 13 or
in plain clothes
or a zone or something. I don't know. Look, bats need looking at. I think for me, as a bowler, an international bowler, I'd be heartbroken if I worked so hard to make a batter make a mistake,
and it sails into
20 rows back.
Still goes 20 rows back. Mitchell Marsh was saying in an interview, even if I mishit it, I know it's still going to go for 6 if I get most of it. I mean, that's not good for cricket, right? I think there is something to that. Anyway, lots to unpack maybe for a future This Week in Cricket when we consider it in more depth. In more detail.
Let's talk some highlights and lowlights, and we'll weave in some of our picks for our tournament team as well. So, Lippy, I might start with you because I think the first one on the list is a New Zealander.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think my biggest highlight from a New Zealand point of view is certainly Rachin Ravindra. We've had a lot of Rachin Ravindra stock as a podcast in general.
Have we traded any of the Will Young stock for it?
No, I have. I've sold my Will Young stock to buy Ravindra stock.
Well, you're probably looking pretty good then from a point of view at the moment in terms of it going up. I mean, I think that none of us saw this though, right? I don't think any of us saw the fact that he might not have been at this tournament if it wasn't for Michael Bracewell's injury, and he might not have played a game if it wasn't for Kane Williamson's injury, not being fit at the start of the tournament. I mean, maybe he would have still been in. Jimmy Neesham might have been the one to miss out. Who knows? But regardless of all of that, I don't think anyone saw him opening either. No one saw this coming. If the selectors did, then kudos to them because they've done a remarkable job. But they gave him this opportunity, and he didn't just take it. Like this, Raj said it after that first 100 against England. Like he's grabbed this with both hands and potentially changed his life, changed the trajectory of his career, and changed what. This is going to sound ridiculous, but could potentially change the trajectory of New Zealand's next couple of years in terms of like us building for the future. There's been a lot about the age of the side, and he's given us a young player that now New Zealand can go, okay, well, how is he going to develop over the next formats? Is he going to play, now is he going to play this Bangladesh test series? He hasn't really been in the test side. He's been in and out of the test side, been largely, a bit part player in that format. Where is his career going to go over the next couple of years? And it's fascinating. And I think, to see him play with such confidence and such calmness, it was just, amazing to watch and to be a part of.
On a podcast, you're not supposed to use words that start with P because they make a little popping sound in the microphone. But
plosive.
But poise, I think. He had just displayed so much class and poise throughout this World Cup. I think the only person that saw 578 runs coming is Raj, really, in terms of the expectations. He's had high hopes for Rachin Ravindra for a long time, so he needs to get some credit. He's been on the Rachin Ravindra bandwagon, as you have, Stu, for a long, long time. So yes, is he in your team of the tournament though?
He is, but I tell you what, when we kind of talk about the team of the tournament, I did, I guess if we're going towards that sense, I did have a very difficult time for New Zealand because a lot of the good players from the other sides as well were also top order batters. So trying to fit in, when we go through each individual team, trying to work out where we got Travis Head, Quinton de Kock, Rohit Sharma, all these other players, where am I best to use my New Zealand player? I did have a few permutations where he didn't quite make it, but I do think if we're going to pick a best player for New Zealand, I think it was Rachin in the way that he was able to contribute because he scored 3, he contributed a lot across a lot of games. And yes, his spin wasn't super impactful, but he was still, the fact that he could bowl it and give us some overs meant that the way we balanced our side changed and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, to score 300s against England, against Pakistan, against Australia, and then 75 against India. We're talking about the better bowling attacks theoretically in this tournament. It was a phenomenal effort from him.
I'm so glad you're excited about him. I don't think he's going to change the trajectory of New Zealand cricket as much as maybe you hope, but he will change it. He's changed his life, honestly, in this last 8 weeks. He's absolutely changed his life.
He's certainly changed the next 12 months,
yep.
and then he's got to perform in the IPL, and then, that could change the next 4 or 5 years.
But even if he doesn't perform well and he gets one contract for, say, $2.5 million, that's life-changing money. for a young man. And if he invests it wisely, if he's got a sounder head on his shoulders, as we think he does, and it sounds like he does from having chatted to him on the podcast, he has got a very, very bright future ahead of him. Well done him.
But Baldy, a highlight from you, and maybe I'm hoping it's going to incorporate an Australian player.
To
add to our list.
Look, it can. I'm having a look at my team in the tournament here, and it's terrible. It's absolute rubbish. So I wouldn't be looking at my team as the team that were the best performers in the tournament. I mean, some of them are, but it was very difficult to find a player from every nation and fit them in against guys that missed out here. I mean, there's some of the guys that have missed out. Ravindra is one of them. Headwater, Maxwell, all missed out from my team of the tournament as well. So look, so many good players, so much excellence in this World Cup was one of my real highlights. It is just the amount of outstanding play we saw over the course of this tournament. We've talked so much about batting and how excellent the batting has been, but guys like Sharma, Madhushankar, I won't list too many more, but the bowling was also outstanding in patches. We've had some really, really exciting cricket being played, records being set by batters and by bowlers. The level of excellence in this tournament, for me, has been outstanding. But one of the things I liked in particular was the performance of Afghanistan, above expectations over the course of this World Cup. We spoke about them in the preview. What was a pass mark for them in terms of games won? I thought it was 2. I think we sort of extended that out and said a stretch goal of winning 3 would be brilliant. They won 4. They were just brilliant in this tournament.
And very close to winning 5, obviously.
Absolutely. They were within a hair of beating Australia, really. And that was, that was a very good game as well. So I had Ibrahim in my tournament. We spoke a lot about Gurbad's over the course of the tournament, but Ibrahim, 376 runs at 47, strike rate of 76, consistent performer. He was in my team of the tournament.
I've got Ibrahim as well, and I had Kane for New Zealand actually. I just think because of the impact that he having come back from 2 injuries, really, an injury into the tournament and performed straight out of the gates in that first game, and then even after his second injury came in and looked quality.
He was phenomenal, and look, there are other candidates for New Zealand. I mean, Daryl Mitchell.
Yeah, I had Daryl Mitchell.
Mitchell Santner. I think there were some really strong performers. Just on Afghanistan, how good do we think they can get? Because their side is very, very young. They're a side that has. Sometimes we see these tournaments, right, and a team rises or exceeds expectations, and you think that it's a linear trajectory, right? That they're going to go, okay, so next in 4 years' time they're going to be one of the sides to beat. Are they going to be Sri Lanka that goes on in 96 and wins the tournament? Are they going to be a team like that? Which if you look back to 92, I don't think Sri Lanka was anywhere near as good as Afghanistan was in this tournament. But yeah, I mean, how good do we think they can be, given that I still don't think that they're in the regular, I haven't looked at their fixture list. They are in the, World Test Championship, and they are starting to get more games, but, they don't get the number of games that every other team gets.
Without getting into the murkiness of the politics around Afghanistan cricket, let's leave that to the side. If we just focus on Let's make the assumption that all of that gets sorted out and funding.
It's a large assumption.
Because I don't think we
can't solve that.
We can't unpack that. We don't have time to unpack that even on this podcast with the 3 of us. Let's assume that all gets sorted out and they get quality games against quality opposition and they get funding to develop their cricket pathways and programs in country. Their flaw, I think, is Sri Lanka. They've got so many good young spinners. We've now seen the emergence of a couple of batters in the middle order in this World Cup, as well as the openers, that are capable of delivering on the biggest stages against good attacks. I think the flaw for them is beating Sri Lanka and beating sides like Sri Lanka in the tournament, beating Bangladesh. Those are the games that I think they would be targeting on a regular basis, not a one-off basis, but a regular basis. So this for me is now the benchmark for them going forward, finishing 5th or 6th in a World Cup, looking at the Group 6 stages for 2027, for example.
And look, like you say, we've not got time to unpack that, but I think unfortunately you can't park the politics, and that's going to be the defining factor, a little bit like it probably has been for Sri Lanka.
Yeah,
you know,
and the West Indies, right?
When you look at when they came into the international game, what they did winning that '96 World Cup, but you know, we've just been suspended. I know that's they asked to be suspended, so that yeah, well, yeah. Again, we might come on to that, but I think they actually asked the ICC to suspend them to try and get the government interference out of the game, but. Anyway, look, we've not got time to go into all of that. I'm going to go with the lowlights, and it isn't an England lowlight, but it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about Pakistan. I really hoped that they could probably perform in this tournament in conditions that they're not used to playing in, because of the quality of the side that they were able to put out. They were sensational in that T20 World Cup in Australia that England just managed to get over the line in a tight final. They'd got 3 or 4 absolute gun batters, 3 or 4 absolute gun bowlers. I was gutted that they didn't sort of make the latter stages of the tournament, because I think, again, coming into the kind of jeopardy conversation, if they had got into those knockout stages, you wouldn't have wanted to play them in a semi-final. So disappointing that, you know, they didn't manage that. Babar Azam kind of almost got going, but didn't kick on and get a big score, a big 100. I've got Mohammad Rizwan as my Pakistan player in my team of the tournament. And any thoughts on that?
I found it so hard to pick a player from Pakistan because they have underperformed, I think, in this World Cup against the standards, against their capability. Let's put it this way, right? Against the capability that they had. Their ceiling was semi-final, final in this tournament in terms of the side that they had on paper and the way that they can play. But if you have a look at the way that they performed over the course of the tournament, no one really stood out with bat or ball. I mean, you've got Shaheen, 18 wickets at 26, Rizwan, 395 runs at 65, but they're really the only two, and maybe Baba,
I think
deserving.
Shaheen was well below his best. I know those stats look, you know, okay on paper, but I think the eye test, you know, he was nowhere near what I had, you know, hoped for him as a, you know, top level player.
His ceiling is best bowler in the tournament, really. Like, if he is at his best, he is upside with Bumrah and Sharma and all the rest of it as best bowler in the tournament. So, you know, that even if they were slightly below their best, I think that, I agree with you, Adam.
I think we might have underestimated the weakness of their spin attack and how much that might hurt them. And, you know, we talked a little bit during the tournament about them, you know, missing Naseem Shah. And I do think that played a factor. But, you know, because it meant that there was a lot on Haris Rauf and a lot on Shaheen Shah Afridi. And I don't think either of them performed, you know, particularly Haris Rauf found it very hard to kind of...
out of his role.
Yeah. I mean,
he's not in the role that he performs best in. And I think that's the problem for Pakistan, is they had too many players like that in that tournament.
Yeah, and you know, just their strength really was that they had, you know, such a good core of bowlers, and then you took Naseem Shah out of it, and their spinners were just ineffective in this tournament, and suddenly you had 2 or 3 handy bowlers. I mean, Mohammad Wasim actually was someone I considered for my team of the tournament.
Statistically, he was
even though he only played 4 games, but the fact that he kind of came in and I think was easily their best bowler while in those games, you know, showed that he could bowl in different stages of the game and perform really well. But
10 wickets at 21. Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've got a New Zealander, Rachin Ravindra. We've got Ibrahim from Afghanistan.
Well, I didn't have Ibrahim. If we're going around the table,
who did you have?
I had.
If we go around the table, we are going to be here all night. Who did you have?
I had Azmatullah Omarzai. I thought he was fantastic, and I actually think in the same way that Ravindra, you know, changed the trajectory of his next 12 months, I would be stunned if Omarzai is not in like all of the auctions going forward.
Yeah.
You know, the way he can hit the ball, the way he can run in and bowl. You know, he's going to be a very sought after player in a lot of these auctions, and I thought his contribution. I didn't even have Ibrahim in my conversation just because I had actually him and I had Shahidi, the captain, because I just thought that he contributed. I think he scored 350s in a row at one point. He was very, very consistent throughout the tournament, and we knew their openers were going to be good, but I think that their middle order really is what sort of got them to those wins and took them across the line. So
a few not outs boosting their averages there, Amazi and Shahidi, but both of them averaging 50 and 70 in the tournament. So they've done very well.
All good. Fantastic argument. 2-1 to Ibrahim. And we're a democracy. Right.
Are we?
Well, we're not, but we have to be something in order to not exceed the recording length of the camera.
Okay. Well, let's move along.
If you want to be quick, I think we said we would have two players from one team. Do we both have Kohli and Shami? Because I've
leading Kohli and Shami,
leading wicket taker, leading run scorer.
Yep.
Kohli showed that he, absolutely still has it. Absolutely, is going to be in every single conversation for ODI GOAT of all time.
9 scores in the tournament, out of 11 knocks. It's unbelievable.
794 runs at average of 10,000 and a strike rate of infinity for Virat Kohli.
And I think, what Binksy just said is the most impressive part for me, because when you look at those averages, there are a lot of averages when you just go through the list and you see players that have been bumped up by their not outs or whatever. And then you just run through Kohli's scores and you go, okay, well, he scored 300s and 650s in 11 digs.
Yeah.
The consistency was just amazing. And, his wicket in the final was, I think, the big, him and Sharma, those were the two big moments that changed that game.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit then about Sri Lanka and the Netherlands next. Who have we got? I'm hoping it's a clean sweep for Madhushanka.
Yeah, so Sri Lanka's easy, right? Because in a tournament, again, where they were under par, I think
they were dismal. You can say it. They were terrible, weren't they?
They were. I mean, some extenuating factors, injuries and players and turmoil and all the rest of it.
Please don't unsubscribe in Sri Lanka, by the way. But yes.
I think,
the Sri Lankan fans will be disappointed with the way their team
Absolutely.
played. But they should be excited about Dilshan Madhushanka, 21 wickets at 25. Absolute Chaminda in the making. That's his ceiling for me. He can be as good as Chaminda.
Different bowler than Chaminda. He's faster, isn't he? He was excellent. Absolutely superb.
The Netherlands? Who have we got for the Netherlands?
I had Bas de Leede. I've got Bas de Leede at 7 because if I need to get down to 7 in my batting and if I need him as a bowler, then the other players in my team have done something wrong. I found it very difficult to pick a standout player from the Netherlands because they all contributed equally without any of them being outstanding in the course of the tournament. And they all have what look like on paper middling returns in terms of averages and runs and strike rates, etc. But they were a team that outperformed their statistics over the course of the tournament in terms of the way that they played. But I had to pick someone from the Netherlands and I had an all-rounder spot open, so I picked Bas de Leede.
I went with Scott Edwards. I just thought that I think he scored 250s in the 2 games that they won. So I think that, I tried to give a lot of weight to contributions that mattered when you look, because as we just discussed, the stats can kind of tell you one thing, but I tried to focus on, what actually mattered, what got these players or what got these teams wins. And I think Scott Edwards as well kind of summed, yes, because he's the captain, because he's the wicket keeper, can sum up the fact that you just said, that they played better than the sum of their parts. And I think actually they're quite unlucky to have finished last in this tournament. When you look back at that scorecard, by no way do I think they performed the worst in this tournament. I think they, should be ahead of Bangladesh, should be ahead of Sri Lanka.
I agree.
In terms of actually the cricket that they played and even the challenge that they offered to other sides. I know they took a couple of big hidings and that's why they're so low down. But look, I think they really performed well, and I'm encouraged to see what they can do going forward. What I would, what I would like to see is for, I have no idea, this is a comment, not knowing anything about the development in the Netherlands. A lot of these players that in that side obviously play for different, they play the bulk of their cricket in different countries. I guess the next step I would see from the outside for the Netherlands is, building your depth where you've got a great under-19 side. Like Afghanistan had a really good under-19 side that has, and Bangladesh and these other teams that have got these really good youth sides that can go then build their cricket. And I don't know that you're ever going to get that in the Netherlands, maybe not, but I think that's the next step to them actually being a more consistent side in years to come.
I think it's been tough for them, particularly post-Brexit, because I think a number of their players would have been able to play county cricket, and that avenue got taken away from I think Bas de Leede, actually. I think he was at Sussex. So I think that's probably taken them back a little bit in terms of development, particularly playing in the Northern Hemisphere as well. So, they clearly need some investment. Ireland would come into the same category, I think, in terms of, there are probably more cricket grounds for sure in Ireland than there are in the Netherlands, but I think it's that infrastructure and that development that they're going to need. And then, yes, a shop window for their players to play in, which is going to be tough for them to develop a domestic competition as a standalone thing. Yeah. Let's get
Bangladesh real quick.
We'll get Bangladesh and England out of the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bangladesh. Anyone? Thoughts?
I had Mahmudullah because there was no one else, to be quite honest with you.
Fair. I had Mahmudullah as well because he's the only one who stood up.
Disappointed in Bangladesh?
Hugely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Hugely. Had all of the right tools in the right part of the world for them to perform.
Too many guys at the end of their careers, the likes of Shakib, the likes of...
I think it's the opposite, actually. I think the disappointing thing is the opposite. That, we're sitting here going, Mahmudullah was their best player. Shakib is another one that was in the conversation, and Mushfiqur. They were the players that performed best for them.
Yeah. Whereas
they've got a lot of young talent, but, you can see it in the glimpses that they give you, the players like Shanto and, but we just didn't see it, and we didn't even really see it for 2 games in a row. We kind of saw...
You didn't even see it for 1 game in a row.
Half an innings,
right? You saw glimpses from Sri Lanka of excellence.
Bangladesh.
From Bangladesh and Sri Lanka of excellence, but then you saw long periods of cricket that is not up to the standard that they would set for themselves in the field with the bat or with the ball. They made rookie mistakes. They just weren't consistently excellent enough to match it with some of those good sides, like we saw Afghanistan do. Consistent excellence over the course of the tournament was their recipe for success.
Yeah. England, did anyone have anyone other than Milan?
I didn't.
I had Milan, and I think I think when you were talking about team building, I had Milan, and that meant that I couldn't have a bunch of other top order players because when Milan averaged 40 in this tournament. When I think about that England side, I think he was far and away their best player in terms of someone that actually held their own.
Well, Bordy's got something different, and I've got the casting vote.
I've got Stokes. Yeah, but Stokes averaged 50. And he scored 304 runs. Okay, he only scored 304 runs, but didn't play the whole tournament. He's the only guy who really... we saw glimpses of how good he could be in the tournament. We didn't see anything from Butler. We didn't see anything from Bairstow. We saw glimpses maybe from Wokes 1 or 2 games, but England gave us glimpses and patches of the team that they could be, but they just weren't at the races, unfortunately, in the World Cup. And it's a huge disappointment for me that they weren't at the pointy end in the tournament, because we would have had a much different conversation about what this format was like and close games and all the rest of that. Permutations come off the back of a strong England side in this performance. So a good World Cup is a strong England World Cup. I can't believe I just said that.
I've gone with Milan, and the reason I've gone with Milan, I think is leading into the tournament there was still noise and conjecture around his place in the side, and in the games where we did perform, he performed as an individual, big 100 in one of the games, 140 odd, and importantly for me, from a strike rate perspective, that was going to be a criticism of whether he was going to get us off to the kind of starts that we needed, and his strike rate was above 100. So, close run thing, because I think, like Bordy said, Stokes, showed some glimpses of brilliance, and unfortunately, that's all we really got to go on from. Unfortunately for me, that's all we've got to go on from England was the odd glimpse of brilliance.
I like Milan.
Let's move on to South Africa. I think we talked about them in the preview show. I'm pretty sure I talked about them in the preview show and thought they were going to be a chance, and they certainly turned it on towards the latter stages. Some destructive batting. Who have we got on our list here?
Yeah, well, we asked, didn't we, in that preview, which South Africa is going to turn up, because they'd just crushed Australia in that series beforehand. They'd shown the destructive power that their batting had, and that side turned up to the tournament. And throughout most of that tournament, they were very, very good. They had a couple of bad days. They obviously, couldn't quite get across the line. Obviously, 213 or whatever is not a good score for for South Africa. 212 is not a very good score for South Africa to be chasing in a semi-final against Australia, but they were brilliant, and a lot of their that's where when we get to the top 4 semi-final spots, there weren't many other players outside. I don't think there were many players outside of those top 4 squads that you'd pick in your world, your best tournament team if you were just picking the best players. I think me and Borley were talking beforehand. I don't think the tournament team that we're going to end up with, I think I would back any of these semi-finalists to beat that tournament team.
But that would have been easy.
Oh, I know. I guess that's just the point I'm making, and I think there were a lot of contributors. I mean, Quinton de Kock did not make my side, but I thought he was absolutely fantastic. I actually went with Gerald Coetzee, mainly because, as I said, a lot of batters in these other sides that I had to fit in. Rizwan,
long hair and a headband,
and he was just fun. He's just so much fun, and he bowled brilliantly. 20 wickets at under 20. He added something to that South African bowling lineup that really made an impact. And I think he was fantastic. And I'm another player that I'm kind of excited to see where the next 12 to 18 months go for him. Can he, if Nortje comes back, and can he break into that Test side and really make an impact at all 3 levels if South Africa ever plays Test cricket again?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Nortje, because I think when he pulled out of the tournament with injury, that was they might struggle a little bit now from a seaming perspective. So I've got Coetzee as well. And look, I think when I look at the stats, 20 odd wickets, or 20 wickets exactly, I should say, averaging 19.8, but his strike rate of 19 is well up there. I mean, Mohamed Shami has got like under 11s bowling figures, so I think you kind of take him out. Take out the high score from the Russian judge and the low score from the American judge, don't you? So Shami comes out. So from a seaming perspective, he's better than Bumrah from a strike rate perspective.
And he only played 7 games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he missed 4 games, or missed 3 games.
Baldy, you got him as well?
No, I have Quinton de Kock. Yeah, 594 runs, 400s. Swan song performance, we think, maybe, unless he unretires at some point. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and he was, for me, still the best opening bat at the World Cup, even better than Rohit, because because he allowed his guys behind him to overachieve. In the course of the tournament, he allowed Rassie van der Dussen to overachieve, Markram overachieved, Klaasen overachieved, Miller overachieved. Well, not overachieved, but they maximised their potential, and they were given the most opportunity to do what they were doing best because of the start that they got from Quinton de Kock. Bavuma didn't have a great tournament. Reza Hendricks actually had a pretty good tournament when he was standing in for Bavuma. But it was de Kock that got them off to the start that they needed. Holy smokes,
I've only just flagged that he got 400s.
That's where his tournament was very different than Sharma's, wasn't it? So different. Sharma got off to those flying starts.
But got lots of 40s.
And then it was actually Virat that did what Quinton de Kock did for South Africa, and that he built, the longer innings that allowed the other players to bat around, whereas Quinton de Kock did that jobs. Right from the top.
He had to go for it in the opening overs, and then he went on with it and made big scores.
Well, if I've got this right, we've only got one nation left, haven't we?
Did we decide who we got for Australia?
Of course we didn't, because we asked Bordy a question about Australia, so he avoided the answer. That's what he always does. Which has worked out nicely on this occasion, because the winner of the tournament gets to talk about who they're picking from their country. In fact, the listeners are going to know who you're going to pick. Who did you pick for Australia?
Everything about me wanted to actually pick Travis Head because of the way that I've just said. I wanted to value performance in the big moments, and I think his 100 against New Zealand, which at that time that was a massive game, that was sealing your spot in the semi-finals and not having to have the jeopardy for the rest of the tournament. He'd obviously just come into the tournament at that point. To go out and for him and Warner to score 118 off the first 10 overs, blow New Zealand away and do that. Then obviously to contribute in both the semi unexpectedly with the ball, take a couple of wickets, and then in the final to on the biggest stage in front of a billion people.
I sense a but though.
Well, I couldn't fit him in because I had to have David Malan and these other top order players. So I actually went with Zampa, mainly because I had to have a spinner. Like, I had to have a spinner in the side. I do think Zampa's deserving of being in there, and out of all the spinners, I think he was the most impactful. You could make an argument for Jadeja and mainly Jadeja, I think, over Kuldeep, but both of those two Indian spinners were very, very good as well. But Australia's tournament turned when Adam Zampa's form turned. The first couple of games were terrible, and even if Zampa he actually didn't have huge contributions in the semi or the final, but throughout the course of that tournament, as soon as Zampa became a factor through the middle overs and picking up wickets in those stages, Australia's tournament turned, and I think he was very much deserving of being the number one spinner in this tournament.
We'll give you the final say, Bordy.
Okay. Who have you got, Adam?
So I was actually between, and I cannot believe I'm going to say this.
Can we clip this for the
I don't think I can actually say this. I've got David Warner written down on my list. Again, I just think, tournament swan song for him, you would suggest.
He keeps saying, see you in 2027.
Although he's, and look, he is supremely fit, isn't he? So, look, who knows? But I'd got Warner written down, but I think I've got to give it to Zampa. Again, balance of my side. I've got Zampa. From a statistical perspective, the form he showed, the consistency he showed, and then I think also 297 is the key number for him throughout this tournament, and that is the number of oat milk flat whites he made with his barista skills.
Can I just say it is quite remarkable, and probably goes to show why Australia, why Australia were massive underdogs, and maybe weren't the best team in this tournament is sort of a bit silly, because we've just named a bunch of players. We haven't named a guy who scored a double hundred, and a guy and that same player actually scored.
We might do.
And no, but I mean, in this conversation far, we haven't named a guy who's scored the greatest ODI innings of all time by many people, and in the same tournament scored the fastest 100 of the tournament, which was a separate innings. So, pretty impressive.
Our format for picking the team of the tournament is severely flawed, because I don't have him in my side either. Yeah. You're right.
If anyone hasn't clicked, that's Glenn Maxwell.
That's Glenn Maxwell, 400 runs at 66, strike rate of 150. I think he averaged about 55 with the ball, but that's all right, because he's plus 11 as an all-rounder anyway. It doesn't matter. I didn't have him in the team. I had Adam Zampa. Australia were rubbish in the first two games. Adam Zampa looked a shell of himself. I think he was carrying an injury. He looked like he was labouring in the field. Even down at third man, he wasn't moving well in those first couple of games, but he came right, and Australia turned their fortunes around with it. He was the guy who got Australia going from a bowling perspective, and he had to, because Australia's pace bowlers weren't doing the job in the first 10 or 15 overs. So he carried a tremendous burden for Australia from a bowling point of view. But you're right, Maxwell 400 at 60, Head 330 at 54, Warner 535 at 48. All fantastic contributors for Australia.
There you go. Boys, we've ticked over an hour on the podcast, so any closing comments about this World Cup before we wrap up? We're leaving with Michael.
Oh, don't leave it with me. We'll be here all night. No, don't leave it with me.
Can I just say, I know we've said it so many times, but I've really, really enjoyed the fact that, well, congratulations to us. Firstly, we said we were going to do daily pods every single game of this tournament, and we actually did. So, if you've stuck with us for this hour, I think we deserve a little pat on the back for doing that. I'm very, very happy that we did, because it meant that we got so much interaction from everyone else, and all the chat that we've had. We've said it many times. Thank you for all of the conversations that we've had with you on YouTube and through our social media. But it has been really fun, and it actually made the tournament a lot more enjoyable for me. Waking up, going without sleep for all of those days, it actually made it so much more enjoyable to kind of share it with a lot of people, and that's actually what it felt like.
Can I just also echo that sentiment, Stuart, and just thank the fans that reached out with kindness and with positive engagement throughout the World Cup. It's very, very easy to be negative when talking about, the creative works of other people. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed kindness and showed love, because, when you read a negative comment or when someone tells you suck, it kind of does. It gets through the otherwise stout armour of my defences. So thank you, everyone, for your kindness and support. It means a lot to us here at the Top Order Pod, and we hope you're enjoying our show.
Yeah. I'll go the other way. Thanks for the negative comments, because it gets me fired up.
Well, you can direct them at Adam.
It gets me fired up. But no, look, it's been great to have the support throughout the course of the tournament. I've actually really liked, in a different way to you, Lippy, the way the games fell in terms of timing, because it meant there was always that little highlights package ready for you to watch when you got up in the morning. So that was, a really good way of following the tournament, I think, particularly with so many games. I couldn't stay up every single night and watch every game like you. I don't know how you did it, pretty much, but it was great to watch those little 20-minute
if you look closely, I've got a massive bag under one of my eyes has just completely given up this week after all of just not getting any sleep.
I'm sure the viewers will point that out on the YouTube. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure covering the course of the World Cup. As we said earlier on the podcast, we've got cricket already in situ across the world. So we will be back next week. We'll cover the first couple of games in this T20 series, India and Australia. The game starts in 5 hours and 13 minutes. Cricinfo reliably informs me. And then we've got, obviously, New Zealand domestic cricket has been in full swing all the way through this World Cup, the Plunket Shield. So we'll
just saw Ajaz and Neil Wagner on a plane over to Bangladesh, so that Test series is not far away.
Yeah, so we've got Test cricket coming up as well, all before Christmas, and then of course through the Big Bash and the Caribbean Premier League and everything else. So we will be back in your feeds on a weekly basis now for This Week in Cricket, and perhaps some news and views and interviews dotted throughout the season as well. We'll also be taking a Top Order podcast road trip as well, so we hope to see some of you in person at cricket grounds around New Zealand. We'll be down in the Basin, I think, for the Test match against Australia, won't we?
Well, you've said it now, so we have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll have daily updates from there, no doubt. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us all here in Auckland. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please recommend it to a friend. If you haven't subscribed or liked on YouTube or one of our podcast channels, please leave us a review, smash a like, whatever you need to do from a social media perspective. We will get some professional help with this at some point, I'm sure. But it is good night and God bless from us here. We'll see you soon. Good night.